to Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support people going through a relationship breakdown and all of the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Lisa Gatchell, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. And today we are delighted to welcome divorce coach and domestic abuse specialist Caron Kipping to the podcast as we explore how to spot the early red flags of abuse in relationships. So welcome, Caron. It's lovely to have you back on the podcast. Could you start by just introducing yourself to the listeners? So giving a little bit of background as to who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. And thank you for having me. So I am a divorce coach. So I support men and women that are separating and divorcing abusive and controlling partners. So people that are coming out of very difficult relationships. My background is I've worked in the charity sector with my local women's aid type organisation, the Dash Charity, for around 16 years before I branched off into divorce coaching. So now I see clients privately, one-to-one. We do monthly coaching sessions, group sessions, and they have a peer support group as well. So I'm always really passionate about raising awareness around these types of issues because unfortunately it's so prevalent and lots of people really don't understand what a coercive or a controlling relationship is. So this is a great opportunity to do that.
Yeah, fab. I mean, domestic abuse is a big umbrella term and it encompasses all sorts of different behaviours. And we've really seen over the last few years that the definition of domestic abuse has really changed and expanded sort of as society has become more aware, if you like. Could you start by just giving us either a definition or some examples of what we would class as domestic abuse?
So, yeah, it is a really wide term and it is a spectrum of behaviour. So at one end of the spectrum, you might have the more mild forms of abusive behaviour. Well, I mean, that's a matter of perspective. But, at one end, you might have, very serious criminal violent behaviour. And at the other end, you might have non-physical abuse, but still very difficult and traumatic emotional abuse. So it does encompass things like emotional and psychological abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, and using the children as a weapon. That's another tactic. And isolating you from your friends and family and peer support, and opportunities to get help, really. So it's a very some of the tactics can be quite subtle, some of them can be very obvious, and it's really a whole pattern of behavior that is very intentional. And it's usually over a specific person. So we're not talking about anger here. We're talking about very controlled behavior that is aimed at a specific person. And usually that is the partner or the ex-partner, somebody who's in that intimate relationship. And it's really designed to make that person subordinate, to keep them dependent on them, to stop them from ending the relationship or from leaving. And it's about punishing them. So it's this pattern of behavior that causes so many challenges when you're in that relationship. And it becomes normal because it drip feeds in very slowly over time. You actually don't realize that it's happening to you. I always say, if somebody punched you in the face on the first date, would you go back for a second date? No, you wouldn't. But they don't do that, right? It's very, very subtle. So,
I mean, that time, that gradual increase, the fact that it's not immediate, obviously, what we're here to talk about today is hopefully helping out anyone who's in a relationship themselves or knows someone who's in a relationship. And stopping it getting to that stage, where the abuse becomes, to the level that it can get to. So perhaps what the best thing to start with is running through, like, how can you spot those early flags? You're in the first flush of a romance, everyone's very excited, honeymoon period, spending lots of time together, all those great things, all the love chemicals are doing crazy things in your brain. How can you then take a moment and think, oh, hang on, that might not be right, because that's going to be a really difficult thing to do.
Of course. And your emotions can run away with you, particularly if you've not had great relationships before, or you're feeling particularly vulnerable at that time. Domestic abuse can happen to anybody. It can happen to the most confident of people as well as people that are vulnerable. But it is about trusting that gut instinct. When you get that funny feeling and it's like an alarm bell going off, and something, just like a niggling feeling that you think something's not quite right here, you must trust that, because that is actually it is your alarm bell. It's your physical response to something that doesn't feel quite right, and it's telling you that something isn't quite right. And so many times I speak to people and they say, I knew very early on, I had a gut instinct that something wasn't right, but I ignored it. And they regret it, and they wish that they had listened to it. So it is a real physical response. So there is that. But more obvious signs than that are things like if the relationship is moving too quickly. So, you have a couple of dates, and then before you know it, they're telling you that you're the love of their life, and you want to be together all the time. You're going to get married. You're going to have children. You're going to do all the things that you have dreamt about. They encourage you to divulge your biggest secrets and your biggest fears. Okay. And they build trust with you very, very quickly. So before you know it, you've told them your whole life story. You've told them all your worries. You've told them all your dreams. And of course, they're going to tap into that. They're going to store that up, and they're going to use it against you further down the line. So they may be promising you everything that you've ever dreamt of, but you've got to hold back a little bit. Don't jump in with both feet and think that all your dreams have come true. You've got to question what you're doing as you go into this relationship. You've got to keep checking in with yourself, and you've got to keep asking yourself, is this normal? Is this healthy? Or is this actually quite intense? Should the other person be saying all these things when we've only been together for a few weeks? Is that okay? It is normal to want to spend lots of time together in that initial kind of honeymoon period. But then what should happen is that as you become more comfortable with each other, you start to gravitate back to your own friends, your family, your own hobbies and activities that you were doing separately. But if you're in a controlling relationship, that won't happen. Your partner will become jealous of that, and they won't like you going back to those people and doing those things by yourself again. They still want that intensity. They want to be with you all the time. So they may be checking your phone. They may be constantly calling you. They may be putting pressure on you not to go to events, not to go to the gym, not to go out with your friends. They may be making little criticisms about you, maybe criticisms about what you're wearing, what you look like. And they want your attention all the time, and they sulk if they don't get it. So, some of those things in isolation might not seem that big a deal, but when you put them all together, it creates this culture of kind of anxiety and fear that you're going to lose that relationship, that you're going to lose that other person and that love that you've suddenly gained. And that can be really powerful. So these relationships become very intense very quickly. And that is always a red flag.
Is it about building a dependency in some ways? Is what the perpetrator is looking to try to do, build a dependency that they can then exploit to their own, so that...
Yeah. So they build you up. They build you up to knock you down. So they build you up, and they make you feel amazing, and, so that you want to be with them all the time, and you think they're the best thing since sliced bread. But then gradually, the little criticisms, the little put downs, when we talk about physical abuse, it might not be a punch, but it might be a bit of rough play that is a bit too rough, or a poke or a grab, or, you know, they might make you feel embarrassed amongst your friends, or they might make you feel a bit threatened or intimidated. And that can be really hard to make sense of. It can be confusing because you think, well, they're really nice and they say that they love me and, you know, that they want to be with me for the rest of our lives. But on the other hand, they're saying these things that actually are not great, and they're behaving in a way that I don't feel comfortable with. It can be really confusing, and it can be really hard to articulate if you're reaching out for help or talking to your friends about it, things that you're a little bit concerned about.
It's a bit like the whole boiling the frog analogy, isn't it? That, you know, it's small little things that kind of build up over time. At what point are you able to articulate, if you like, that this is now tripped over? Because I'm guessing they're not keeping a list or a running tab of what's been happening. And maybe that's the advice, that if there's any concerns, they need to write it down and kind of look at it from I don't know, like fresh pair of eyes. But it's kind of that, you know, if you've been love bombed and you've been built up and you've been put into this wonderful place, if you like, and then it starts to change, it's not even something you can calculate, is it? It's not like you can say, well, after 3 things, that's it, you need to kind of draw a line at that point. But how does somebody make that determination?
It's different for everybody. You know, some people will say, well, after 3 things, that's it, I'm out, and you don't get another chance. For other people, they will keep trying to make the relationship better. So what also makes it confusing is because you tend to take on a lot of the blame for what's happening, even though it's not your fault, even though it is down to the other person's behavior, because they make you doubt yourself. They make you not be able to trust your own judgment and make you question your reality, you know, through gaslighting. So you do question everything, and you try really, really hard. You think, well, maybe if I do this a bit more, maybe if I try this, you know, things will get better. The other person will be happier. And they won't treat me that way anymore. But of course, you're not the problem, so it doesn't work. But writing it down can really help, because it can help you make sense of what's happening and how that behavior makes you feel. So, you know, they're not horrible all the time. They are really nice to you sometimes, and they can seem really caring. And in those moments, you can think, well, it's not that bad. Maybe let's just carry on for a bit longer and let's just see how it goes. You know, maybe if we move in together, things might get better. Maybe if we get married, or maybe if we have a baby, or maybe if they get a better job, or, you know, you can start to feel hopeful and try different things. So you might let it go on for a while before you make that decision. But it is really about, you know, when is enough for you? You know, everybody's line in the sand is different, but you know when enough is enough. And you've heard all the excuses. You've heard them not take responsibility for their behaviour. You've heard them shift the blame onto you when actually it wasn't your fault at all, and to make excuses for their behaviour. And you just know that, you know, this relationship is not going to work.
Going back to what you said about people having that early warning system and knowing from early on that things aren't quite right, not getting the right feeling. I mean, that is something that I hear a lot from clients who will say, and will normally be able to pinpoint a fairly clear initial thing. Everything was perfect until ... And it might be a fairly small initial flashpoint, but, you know, somewhere where the mask has slipped and they've seen what's what. And then something else that I think is quite common to hear from clients who've been abuse victims is saying that, oh, my friends started to notice something, or my family started to notice something. And what quite often follows that is then an attempt by the perpetrator to isolate the victim from their friends and family. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, you know, removal from support groups and that kind of trying to isolate people.
Yeah, isolation is a really powerful tactic. The quicker they can isolate you from your friends and family and support networks, the more power and control they have over you, because suddenly their voice is the only voice that you are hearing. So you're not able to gain anybody else's perspective on anything. You're not able to talk about what's happening at home or in your relationship. And you're not able to have those opportunities where you could potentially reach out for help and support. So people that are controlling are also tend not to be very sociable people. They don't like people. They like being in control, and they feel very out of control when they're amongst other people. They tend not to have many friends. They tend not to have good relationships with their own family. So they are very insular, and they are very dependent on you for any kind of happiness in their life. So they don't want you being around other people. But yeah, quite often friends and family might see those warning signs, and they might think, oh, you know, you didn't speak to her very nicely, you know, when we saw them last time, or, you know, that wasn't really appropriate, or actually I felt really uncomfortable being around, you know, him or her, because they just, you know, were sulking and just making us feel really unwelcome. So again, going back to the fact of how tactics can be subtle and how they can be very obvious. You know, they might not say, well, I don't want you to see your friends or to see your family, but they just might make it so awkward and make you feel so guilty for doing it that actually you start to isolate yourself of your own accord, you know, and this is where you start to adjust your behavior to suit your partner. So you adjust and adjust and adjust to try and keep them happy, to try and keep the situation calm, try and not rock the boat. But what happens as you go through the relationship and it becomes more intense and the controlling behavior gets worse and worse because they're getting away with it, you end up adjusting yourself so much that you completely lose yourself. So the person that you were at the beginning of the relationship is not who you are a few months down the line. You literally become a shell of yourself because you've been molded into another person almost.
And if you're a family member or a friend and you've kind of, you know, you're in this situation where there's kind of been some red flags, they're starting to distance themselves more, and you're concerned, but they are just in this love bubble, if you like, where they're not really listening to any concerns. How do you deal with that? Is it a case that you just have to be there when they come to you, or is there anything that you can do to try and assist the situation?
Yeah, it can be really difficult as a friend or a family member if you are seeing somebody that you love being manipulated by their partner. But you must try and keep those links with them, because hopefully at some point that person will spot those red flags. They will feel very uncomfortable. They will be strong enough to make that decision that that relationship is not right for them. And at that point, they may really need you. But even up until that point, if you can keep linking in with them, you can still have those opportunities to drip feed in another narrative, to find those moments and seize those little bits of opportunities where you can say, you know, how do you feel? How are you doing? You know, are you happy? You know, is there anything that you're not happy with? To get them to start questioning what is going on, but also to use those opportunities to remind them of the person that they were before the relationship. So to remind them of how, you know, brilliant they are, how clever they are, how beautiful they are, you know, how capable they are as well, because they will be hearing a lot of negativity from their partner. So you need to kind of counteract that with some positivity and remind them just how capable they are, and how, you know, don't put pressure on them to end the relationship, because it has to be their choice. And that's part of the way that they will start to feel empowered and feel like they've got a bit of control back again over their life. But you need to be there to keep inviting them to family events, to keep spending time with them as and when you can, even if it's only a short amount of time, but just to ensure that they have those links and they're not isolated and just alone with their abuser.
Something you hear quite a lot about is the phrase the cycle of abuse. I wonder if you can talk through that concept a little bit in there, and that might help people to kind of understand the way that abuse plays out in practice.
Sure. So this goes back to what Lisa was saying about how does somebody know when enough is enough. So everybody that comes out of a coercive and controlling relationship goes through this cycle of abuse and the stages of change. So with the cycle of abuse, basically, when we talk about these subtle tactics of abuse that happen on a daily basis, those things happen and life carries on and it kind of becomes normal. But every now and again, there'll be an escalation. So there'll be an escalation because something has triggered an incident. It might be a verbal incident, an argument. It could be a physical assault, but there will be an escalation where the abuser has become so wound up and so frenzied that, there's an explosion. It's going to become much more intense. And then what happens afterwards is either the abuser will apologize, say sorry, say it'll never happen again, because they're worried that you're going to leave, or worried that you're going to report them to the police, worried that you're going to tell somebody about what's happened. So, they need to try and get things back to normal very quickly. So they will make these false promises. They will promise to go to counselling or therapy, or, they might, kind of shower you with gifts and affection and all the things that you haven't had for a while to persuade you to stay. And, again, things kind of calm down and they go back to normal, and you think, okay, well, we'll try again, we'll carry on for a bit longer. I'm sure they do mean what they say. And everything does seem great for a while. But then gradually, the mask slips, because these promises were fake and this is not who they really are underneath it all. So, they can only keep up that pretense for so long. So gradually they'll start to get wound up about something. There's always an excuse. It could be that they've had a bad day at the office. It could be that, something's happened with your family and that's triggered them off. It could be just the way that you looked at them that day. They dream up any old excuse to try and justify their behavior. And before you know it, escalates again, and then explosion. And then you go round and round on this kind of hamster wheel, this cycle of abuse. But each time you go round it, it becomes even more exhausting. It's really hard to summon up the energy to think about leaving or ending that relationship each time. And each time you don't leave, or you don't tell somebody, or you don't end the relationship, that abuser has got away with that behavior again. So the longer it goes on, the braver they become, and they think, well, they didn't call the police last time, or they didn't tell anybody last time, so therefore that's acceptable and I can keep doing that. And actually I might take it up a level. I might try something else that's a bit worse this time and see how they react to that. And this is how these abusive relationships get worse and worse as time goes on.
So if you're in an abusive relationship, or you're listening to this and you are thinking, gosh, some of the early red flags are sound a bit too close to home, or you know someone and you worry about them being in an abusive relationship, how would you leave an abusive relationship but do it safely?
Okay, so it's really important that you make a plan if you can. Obviously, in some circumstances, things have escalated to a point where it's really not safe for you to be there any longer. And at that point, you may need to reach out to the police or to organisations like Women's Aid. But wherever you can, if you can make a plan and do things methodically, it will be much safer. Because, like I said at the beginning, these relationships are based on power and control. And when somebody feels like they're losing their power and they're losing their control over the other person, then they panic, and they really need to try and regain that sense of control. So if they sense that the dynamic is changing, if they get an inkling that you are about to leave, then they may become even more controlling and abusive. So you need to do your research, speak to professionals, make a plan of how you are going to leave the relationship, maybe how you're going to leave your home, or, unfortunately these days, a lot of people do end up having to still continue living in the same home as their abuser whilst they separate, which can be a difficult situation. But it doesn't mean that, it can't be done. It can be done. You don't have to put up with abuse just because you are tied into a mortgage together or because you have children together. It's all about planning. It's about understanding what your legal rights are. It's about building up a support team of people around you to help you. So you might have a solicitor, you might have somebody to help you understand the finances. You might have somebody like myself to give you some practical strategies on how to manage your soon-to-be ex's behaviour and how to safety plan and stay safe. And then, of course, you've got your friends and family. You might be able to start reaching out to them and connecting with them a bit more.
So that's it for this episode of Stowe Talks. Thanks for listening. If you are at any immediate risk of domestic abuse, please call the police, or you can access support from the National Domestic Abuse Helpline on 0808 2000 247. You can find out more about the work Caron does supporting clients at www.caronkippingcoaching.com and follow her on all the usual social media channels. If you would like more information on our podcasts, head over to stowtalks.co.uk and please rate, like, share and review this podcast where you can.